I'm Bill Kassel, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. This week we talk money, comparing both the practical and moral aspects of traditional fiat currency with the online exchange medium known as Bitcoin. Join us, sit back and enjoy some free expression. One of the most common cliches is that money is the root of all evil. Now, this is a misquote of St. Paul, who in his letter to Timothy observed that it's the love of money that promotes evil. Nevertheless, we hear this line all the time. In recent years, the money buzz has been about so-called cryptocurrency. Now, that's a form of electronic exchange, the best-known type of which is called Bitcoin. There's a lot of interest in Bitcoin right now. Some people have made a killing in what's known as Bitcoin mining. Others, well, not so much. Eric Sammons is the editor-in-chief of Crisis magazine. He's written a book that argues for the efficiency of Bitcoin as well as for its moral efficacy. It's called, appropriately, Moral Money. It's from Sophia Institute Press, and he's here to talk about it. Eric, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. This is great.
I once had an economics professor who argued that money is morally neutral, that it's what we do with it that can reflect evil, or good for that matter. Is that an accurate assessment?
I really don't think it is. I think historically it is, but it hasn't been true over the past maybe 150 years, maybe 120 years or so. Historically, money is some type of natural good. Something like gold or silver, or even seashells or human teeth have been used as money, various things like that, stones. They've all been used as money. Obviously, those things are morally neutral. They just come out of nature. They come out of God's creation. And so by themselves, they are not either moral or immoral. However, a new form of money was created over the past it existed older than this, but it became very prominent about a little bit over 100 years ago, and that's something called fiat currency or fiat money, which is, us Catholics should know, fiat from Our Lady's fiat, let it be done unto me. But this is like an inversion of that because it's basically saying, the government saying, we will create money out of nothing. And so this is very different. So there's this natural money I've talked about, with gold and silver, things like that. But then you have what basically paper money or fiat money, which is money that's just simply created out of nothing, typically by the government, and in fact enforced as the only form of money allowed to be used. And so now we have moral activities. When we talk about gold, it's just something that God creates it. But when we talk about fiat currency, this is something man generates. Man decides whether or not you can use it or not, or you can use anything else. It decides how much money will be in the money supply. All these things are determined by man, which makes it now open to morality, now open to human decisions, and also the fall. And so what we see is fiat money, it is an immoral form of money, whereas the older historic forms of money, they are morally neutral. So your economics professor was right up to a point, but ultimately, though, the modern forms of money are very different than the historic forms.
Where's the immorality? I mean, I can see that fiat money, of course, is used to manipulate the economy or to buttress certain government policies and initiatives. But beyond that, what's not to like?
Essentially, the reason I would argue that fiat money is immoral, there's actually a couple reasons. But first, I would talk about inflation, which is, technically speaking, when the government decides to add more money to the money supply. Doing that has many different economic consequences. Some are intended, some are not. But ultimately, in a very basic form, what we're saying is there's more money in the system, which devalues the money that's currently in the system. What that means is prices go up. So let me try to explain it a little bit more simply. If you have, let's say, 100 people living in a village, and all 100 of them have $100. You can't sell something for $500 because everybody only has $100 at this point. But let's say one person all of a sudden was able to create out of nothing another $1,000. Well, now that person can purchase things that the other people can't. It can drive up the price because it's like, oh, yeah, you want to pay $20 for that? I'll pay $40 for it because I have all this new money that's just been created. And so what happens is when new money is flooded into the system, it rewards those who receive it first. So in other words, government officials, maybe banks, people like that. But it harms the poor and the middle class because what happens is prices go up and they're not really receiving that new money that's flooded into the system. So that's one way in which it does this. Another way is just that governments can do things with that money they can create that they wouldn't be able to do in a true democracy in which the people have to basically support something. So, for example, if a government leader wanted to fund an unpopular war, and the people didn't really support it. He knew he couldn't get a tax increase to support this war, but if he just creates more money, he can fund it then. Likewise, he can buy off votes. He can fund social welfare programs in order to buy off votes. All he has to do is say, I promise you we will pay for this, we'll pay for that, and he can just do that by creating more money. Essentially what this means is now the government has powers that historically it really didn't have that harms the poor and even the middle class, and it enriches the rich. It also, what it does is it allows them to do things that they wouldn't have been able to do before without the support of the people.
Okay. Well, we've certainly seen political candidates making all kinds of promises and then pulling money out of the air to make them happen. No doubt about that. Contrasting Bitcoin and the other forms of cryptocurrency, before we look at how that corrects that moral problem, could you give us just a thumbnail on what is Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is very misunderstood. It's also, I understand, it's very confusing at first when people first start to learn about it. I've been involved with Bitcoin for a dozen years now, and so I've talked to a lot of people that are first getting started, and so I do understand that it can be confusing. And it's very misunderstood because often the media reports of it, the headlines you see, don't really accurately portray what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin was created in 2009 as a form of money. It was not created as an investment. It was not created as some type of way to buy illegal drugs or something like that. It was just created as a form of money. We've had various forms of money throughout history. And this is something that's developed over time. It's not something that a government official said one day, okay, we're going to use gold or silver or something like that. What happened instead was, over time, certain goods were just simply better for the purpose of exchanging value. Early on, like I'm talking, thousands of years ago, often trade was done through a barter system. You have bananas, I have cows. I want your bananas, you want some of my cows. So we trade them. That's obviously very inefficient, though, because it's going to take a lot of bananas to get one cow, and I can't really cut up the cow if let's say you want for milking or something like that. People realize very quickly we need some type of medium of exchange, some type of way that we can both say, yeah, we give value to this one thing. And like I mentioned, seashells have been used, stones have been used, feathers have been used, teeth have been used. But people realize that certain goods have properties that made them better money than others. For example, money that's very durable is better than money that's not durable. I mean, seashells aren't very good as money because they break very easily. Also, money that's portable is much better than money that's not. So there was actually an island society where this huge rocks were considered money. They would just really stay where they are. And it wasn't very good for money, but that's how they did it. They said, okay, now you own that rock or I own that rock. But they didn't move the rock. Also, money has to be divisible. So if you want to buy just one banana or if you want to buy a house, you have to be able to have forms of money that can do both. It could buy something very small as well as something very large. Ultimately, the forms of money that were most useful ended up being precious metals like copper, silver, and especially gold. And these were good because they were portable, they were divisible, they were durable. So Bitcoin is just a new form of money that resides 100% on the Internet that has these properties of money. It is divisible, it is portable, it's durable. We also then want to talk about the moral properties of money. And one of them is scarcity. the ability that a money will maintain its value because it can't be easily created new. Gold is perfect at this because it's very difficult to mine gold out of the earth. And Bitcoin is like that as well, is it was given properties that make it scarce. So really, ultimately, before we go real detail into Bitcoin, just know it's a form of money like gold, like silver, like the dollar, and it has the properties of money that money has historically had.
But what gives it its value if it's not measured against gold or other forms of recognized currency? What is it that supports it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a perfect question, really, because that's what people want to know. What gives any money value? So early on, like I said, like centuries ago, thousands of years ago, really, when you had these different forms of money like seashells, what gave those seashells value? Essentially, what gave it value was people realized they liked owning it, and they realized other people did too, and so they could trade, and people would accept seashells for their bananas or for their cows. Likewise with gold. People decided, gold is something that we value, and so I'll take your gold for my bananas, or I'll give you gold for your cows, and people would accept that. And so ultimately, value of things on this earth, I'm not talking about human beings. Human beings, of course, have an intrinsic value made in the image and likeness of God, so that's something different. But when we talk about physical items here on earth, the value of them is very subjective. Well, something like gold, everybody started to subjectively value it and realize, okay, this is worth something. And that's how the price of gold even gets determined, is how much do people think it's worth? What is the exact value of it? And you have a whole free market of thousands and millions of people deciding that. Well, that's essentially what Bitcoin, how it got its value was. Somebody created it, and that by creating it, Satoshi Nakamoto, the synonymous name for the person who created it, we don't know exactly who it is. When he created it, it had no value. It valued to him probably. He probably thought it's worth something. But what happened was more and more people started to realize, wait a second, this has actually got that. I think this has value because this can be used as money on the internet very efficiently, very effectively, and it seems to avoid the problems of fiat money. And so more and more people gave it value, subjective value again. And so that's how the price of it's determined. Like when I got involved in Bitcoin, one Bitcoin was less than $1,000. Now it's over $100,000. And all that represents is more and more people saying, I value this as something that can be used as an effective form of money. So that really is ultimately where it gets its value from. And it's a little bit different than the money we're used to using, which is, like I said, fiat money, like dollars. The value that's really told to us from the government says this is what it's worth. But you see in the market, it kind of gets devalued because what happens is you need more and more of it to buy something. So a gallon of milk 40 years ago, I don't even know what it was 40 years ago. Maybe it went for like $1 a gallon or something like that. Maybe the price of gasoline, I know better. Gasoline, I remember it was less than $1 a gallon. Now you can't get it for under $3 a gallon in most places. And so what that's saying is not that gas has necessarily gone up in value, but the dollars have gone down in value. You need more dollars in order to buy that gas. If you think about it, something like milk or gas, it's actually easier to produce these days than it was maybe 50 years ago, even though it's more expensive. That makes no sense if the currency, if the money stays the same value over time, because as it gets more efficient, it should be cheaper. But instead it gets more expensive, not because the item's harder to produce or even that's valued more. It's just simply because the money that's being used is devalued because there's more and more of it injected into the system.
Now, Bitcoin exists in the digital realm. How does it get from there into the real world? In other words, how do I use Bitcoin to buy bananas or cows?
Right. So essentially, it's similar to how you buy anything online. If you think about it, I mean, people sometimes have this mistaken belief that when they put, like when their paycheck is direct deposited into the bank, that all of a sudden there's like cash sitting in the bank that's theirs, that shows up. That just isn't the way it happens. It's all digital. So when your company, your employer, pays you direct deposit to your bank, no actual physical money was ever used in that whole transaction. It was just simply that, some computer program said, okay, now there is, let's say, $1,000 less in the company's bank account, and there's $1,000 more in the employee's bank account. But nothing physical actually changed. And so then when you go to spend that, you take your credit card, you put it in Amazon, you buy something, all that happened was, let's say that $100 item you got at Amazon, the database at your bank subtracted $100 from your ledger, and they added $100 to Amazon's ledger. Again, nothing physical ever happened. And so now, and then they will ship you your item. And this whole process from the time your company paid you, your employer paid you, till the time you buy that item, no physical money was ever exchanged or used. Well, Bitcoin basically does the same thing. It does it in a different way that I would argue is more secure and more moral, things like that. But ultimately what happens is, if, for example, I've done this where I work for somebody and they pay me in Bitcoin. Well, the same thing happens. They send Bitcoin from their digital wallet to my digital wallet, and then if I want to buy something online for Bitcoin, now to be honest, to be clear, most places don't accept Bitcoin these days. Like on my personal website, you can buy my books with Bitcoin, and there are other places, like famously in the last month, Steak and Shake, the restaurant chain, just started accepting Bitcoin at their restaurants. But most places don't. But if they do accept it, all I have to do then is just send my Bitcoin from my wallet to their wallet, and then they have the money, and they can just send me whatever item it is I ordered. So it works just like our current dollars do on the internet.
All right, now we live in the age of digital scams and hackers and one thing and another that are all pretty scary. What makes it secure? I mean, on the face of it, it would seem like a hacker's dream.
It's actually far more secure than our digital money that's in fiat. First of all, before we get to the hackers, recognize that all the money that you, quote-unquote, own that's digital, all the dollars you own, you don't actually fully control them. And we've seen a bank can take them at any time. The government can seize it any time. So you actually don't own the money that you have at the bank, for example. Right. And we've seen this happen. For example, a couple years ago, there was a famous protest in Canada, the trucker protest. Right. And they were raising money for their protest, and it was completely legal what they were doing, and they were raising it through legal means. But the government did not like what they were doing, and so they seized their funds. And they said, okay, we're going to take this money from you, the money that was donated to you legitimately, we're just going to take it from you. And they were able to do that because of the fact that it all sits on these third parties, banks, things like that. You don't fully control it. Bitcoin, you can't do that. You can't take, if somebody owns it on their own wallet, you can't take it from them without their permission. Another example was, I think it was in 2013 or 14, something like that, when Greece was having a financial crisis. Literally what they decided to do was they took, I think it was, I might have the numbers not exact, but they basically took, I think it was 10% of all money that was stored in banks of people over $100,000. So if you had over $100,000 in the bank, they took 10% of it. And that's just, and they said, we need it. It was called a haircut. They said, we just need it because we're in a debt crisis and we need this money. And so that money that you thought was yours, you had $200,000 at the bank, or 200,000, whatever, euros, whatever it was, at the bank in Greece. You thought that was yours. It was safe. It was secure. It wasn't. Not because a hacker took it, but because a legal means took it through the government. And the same thing is true with, and also now when we move to hackers, really, once you understand Bitcoin, and I will admit you do have to have some understanding of what you're doing when you get started. It's a little bit different than normal, like dollars, something like that. But it's still, the average person can understand if they want to. Well, now basically you have the same type of security vectors, as they would say, as any other money you hold. So, for example, your bank account. You don't put your password up on, you don't share your password online with somebody. You don't, like, if you take a phone call from someone and you don't know who it is and they say, oh, give me your password for your bank account, you're not going to do it, or else you shouldn't do it. The same thing is true with Bitcoin, that you're not going to broadcast your security credentials to the world. And if you do, you could get hacked. In fact, if you look at most hacks of both on traditional kind of fiat money as well as a Bitcoin, what you see is it's usually what's called social engineering. Basically, a hacker tricks somebody into giving them their security credentials, their login, their password, something like that. And that still happens a lot. And that's why everybody should always be on guard in our digital world, that you keep those things secure and do your best practices, things like that. And Bitcoin isn't any more insecure than fiat money, digital money. But I would even argue it's more secure for the reasons I was saying before, because it's not able to be taken away by these governments that decide they need your money.
Well, that being the case, I can see where this would be a source of funding which would be unavailable to the government, and therefore the government would be somewhat constrained in their ability to mount wild programs. But is there a moral dimension beyond that?
I think there really is. I think the moral dimension I think in our society today, we're all used to the fiat money system, so it's hard to see sometimes. But what I see is, I have a number of children now who are adults. They're in their 20s, and they're getting married, having kids, starting new jobs out of college, things like that. And the financial burden on them is very great. Something that I think older people, I'm in my 50s, and so people my age, even older, I don't think we always completely see how difficult it is, how expensive things are, because we're proud of the fact that we own a house for a long time, and all of a sudden the value of our house is worth so much more. We paid $100,000 for it. Now it's worth $1 million, or whatever the case may be. Well, that's because of fiat money. It's actually just because we've injected so much money in the system, it's made prices go up. And wages have not gone up the same rate as these prices have gone up. Now all of a sudden I'm a kid. I graduate from college. I start a new job. I'm making what? Maybe I'm making $40,000, $50,000 a year starting off. And now that house that was $100,000 when my parents were buying it is worth $1 million. I can't afford that. And so what I do is, and what everybody tells you to do, is you have to invest. You have to invest. Well, the investments have to be more and more risky because of the fact that inflation's increasing prices by so much. You feel like, okay, now I have to invest in maybe the latest tech stock, or I have to invest in a chat GPT or whatever the case may be, because I have to just to make ends meet, not because I'm trying to get rich, but because I want to support my family. I want to make sure my kids have a good education growing up. I have saved for a rainy day. Traditionally, I'm talking long time ago, you could just save your money in gold or in certificates that represented gold, something like that, and they would keep their value. Now, if you take your dollars and put them under your mattress or even put them in a savings account, it's not going to keep with inflation. It's going to actually go down in time. And so what happens, you have to do riskier and riskier things with your money in trying to support your family. If you have a form of money such as Bitcoin, which does not over time go down in value like that because it's a scarce resource, there's only so many Bitcoin available, now you can simply say, okay, I'm just going to hold my money in Bitcoin, and over time it maintains its value. The same thing is true, by the way, of gold. I'll make sure it's clear. I'm not disparaging gold in any way, shape, or form. But these are because they're scarce, it gives a moral dimension, because I know people, for example, who decide they change their lifestyles. They get married later. They choose to have kids later. They choose to have fewer kids, all because prices are just going up so crazy. And we all know that, for example, when it comes to having fewer kids, perhaps they choose immoral means of not having more children, things like that. So these are all cultural factors that add up. They're not solely because of fiat money. I'll make it clear. That's not the whole reason. But they do. They have impacts. They make, for example, maybe wives who want to stay at home with their kids, but they feel like they have to work because they have to make ends meet, because their husband's job just can't keep up with the inflationary rate of things because of fiat money. So all these are factors that lead to immoral decisions in a society. I think it's like what St. John Paul II said. I remember him talking about this in the 80s and 90s a lot, about structures of sin. And he was referring, for example, to the culture of death with abortion, euthanasia, things like that. There's personal sin, which is very vital. Each of us, he was never trying to discount that. If I procure an abortion for somebody, I've committed a terrible sin, and I am responsible and guilty. I'm responsible for that and guilty of it. But there's also structures of sin in which we participate in these sins. Like, for example, each of us who pay taxes to the government, we participate in the sin of abortion, because those tax dollars, some of them go to fund abortions. That doesn't mean I am morally guilty of this mortal sin of abortion, but it means I am part of this system that is creating decisions that's fostering more and more immoral decisions. And I would argue that our fiat monetary system is a structure of sin. We all participate in it, and yet what it does is it really does foster these immoral decisions, or in these situations, these choices that young couples in particular, but every family has to make, that they shouldn't have to make. They should just be able to work hard, save their money in their form of money and know over time that will allow them to support their family, be safe for rainy days, there's a medical emergency, and save for retirement.
The book is Moral Money by Eric Sammons. You're into something here that really it's a new way of considering value and something that people really need to think about and add it into their moral consciousness. Where can they find out more about the book and maybe get their hands on it?
Well, the easiest way is just go to my website, ericsammons.com, and you'll see a link right there on the page where you can buy the book. You can actually pay in Bitcoin if you want to, but you can also, obviously you can pay in credit card and things like that. And it has some information about the book there as well. And really, I just think it's something I want to make sure I stress that it's a good primer for first just understanding our monetary system. Even if you read the book and you come away and say, I don't think Bitcoin's for me, I understand. But hopefully what you'll come away and say, hold on a second, there is something wrong with our current monetary system. It's not something that is real. It's something we, especially Catholics, should look at and look at the morality of it and consider other forms of money. I personally think Bitcoin is the best form of money that's been created. I think it's even superior to gold, which I like gold, but I think it's superior to gold. But I understand people might not come to that same conclusion. But at the same time, I do think a very strong case can be made that our current fiat money system is fundamentally immoral and a structure of sin.
Eric Sammons, thanks very much for being with us and talking about this. It's very thought-provoking.
Thank you very much, Bill, for having me.
We explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Kassel. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.